Josh, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited that you're here. We've interacted a handful of different times via social media, and I was made the joke at the beginning of we commented on other people's posts on social media. And so we're finally coming together to have you on the podcast. And I'm so excited for you to just instill all your wisdom into the listeners. And I'm excited for the Kids Ministry Circle podcast listeners to get to know you. So why don't you kick off our episode just by sharing a little bit about who you are and maybe how you got started into the whole kids ministry world?
Yeah, so right now I serve at a church plant in Baltimore. We've been here 3 years as of last week. Wild how time flies.
Wow.
Yeah, and right now I lead over all families, which is new for me. I've always been in the just early childhood world. Um, so yeah, going from birth to fours to birth through fifth grade, and now getting to lead our youth too. That has been a huge change, and I've learned a whole lot. But early childhood has always been my zone. So even being 14, 15, I had known I want to work with kids. I had planned to teach school, and then thought, wait, I should confirm that I really do want to work with kids first. I should go work with kids. So I volunteered in kids church and I fell in love with kids church and I never left. I'm still here. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I had thought, well, as I look around church, as I look around the Big C church, I see oftentimes those who work with young kids in church either don't know theology or don't know kids.
Mm.
So I thought, okay, I'm a theology nerd. I learned there for fun.
Hmm.
I should go to school for early childhood and learn how kids grow, and think. And if I can, yeah, if I can know how kids think and how kids grow, I can reach them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So went to school, studied early childhood. I was the one dude in the whole college. Every single day, the professor would say, "Okay, ladies and Josh, time for class." So yeah, I learned a lot. I grew a lot, and as I learned there and served at the church at the same time, part time, looked around and saw there's this huge gap.
Hmm.
That science shows early childhood is a huge deal. Science shows the first 4 years of life form who you are forever.
Yeah.
But in the church world, early childhood is exclusively childcare, and the
Right.
real ministry work starts in kindergarten or
Hmm.
even in youth for
Hmm.
some. So, if science is true that early childhood is a big deal, which I think the things of God prove to be true, so I think that is true, we should act like it. So
Yeah.
I saw this huge gap and I told my wife, I said, I really want to be a preschool pastor. And my sweet wife said, that's great. Is that a thing? I said, no,
She's
it's
like,
not.
is that going to make us enough money to live?
Like, I don't know. But funny enough, by God's grace, the next year I found about 45 minutes from my first church, there was a church hiring a preschool pastor. And I went
Wow.
to that church and said, hey, I was made for this. Please let me serve. And I served there 3 years. That church kind of crumbled under 2020, as many did.
Hmm.
And as we prayed through what's next, the Lord led us here. And we moved from small town Bernie, we moved from small town Bernie, Texas to Baltimore. So big change.
Wow, I didn't know you lived in Bernie. That's like so close to where I was in Austin.
Yeah.
We were
Yeah.
so close to
So
each other.
moved from the mega church world to the church planting world.
Mhm.
Went from several hundred preschool kids. I mean, my church was large enough that they had a full-time preschool pastor.
Yeah.
And then I went to this church where my first week in birth through fifth grade, between two service times, we had 17 kids. And I
Love
was
church
like,
planting.
wow, wow, what a change.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I'm curious, how did you jump in from preschool all the way to families? Did you plant with someone that you knew, or were you like, I think I can do this? I always am nervous sometimes when the family ministry conversation comes up, And they're like, "Yeah, you'd be over students." And I'm like, "Ooh."
Mm.
I'm like, "Are you sure?" And so
Yeah,
what was that transition like of like, well, this early childhood is my world. It's all I think about. And now you're having to think early childhood is just one component. I mean, if you were to group them into 4 groups, it's like early childhood, elementary, middle school, high school. It's one
yeah.
of 4 things that you have to think about. What was that transition like?
Couple of things. So when I was about 15, um, that was a huge faith turning point for me. I sat in a mega church youth group and from stage heard really well and really clear. Hey, we what we say that we believe about Jesus is kind of crazy. So
Mhm.
if Jesus really did live, love, die, and rise, and he's alive right now, your whole life should be built around that.
Mhm.
But if this is not real, playing church doesn't make sense, and you should just
Yeah.
leave. So that was a big deal for me saying, okay, 15 was that point for me,
Mhm.
even though I'm not just naturally inclined to middle schoolers, high
Right.
schoolers. Um, my faith became real during
Mhm.
those years.
Yeah.
And part of why I went into early childhood was so that I could bring that point earlier for kids. So
Yeah.
that kids could see that at 4, at 5.
Mhm.
Um, so youth is a big deal just philosophically for me. Youth is
Mhm.
tough.
Yeah.
Um, it's 2025 is a tough time to be 15.
Yeah. For sure.
And funny enough, what works in early childhood, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more soon, really does still work with youth.
Right, that's what I was gonna say, is, like, your
Yeah.
model at the beginning that you talked about of, like, well, knowing good theology, having this
Mhm.
on one side, but then also knowing how kids think and how kids what their motivations behind things is also important. So you take that from 4-year-olds to
Yeah.
14-year-olds, and you're like, "Oh, you have the same theology that carries a 4-year-old to a 14-year-old that still applies to the 14-year-old, but then you have to learn, okay, how does a 14-year-old think?" Which, I mean, if you've done any research, it's like, oh, a 14-year-old boy is often like a 4-year-old boy,
Yep.
which is like
Yep.
very much my world right now because I'm about to have a 4-year-old boy. And
Yep.
so it's like thinking like, okay, if I can just learn, which you can, there's so much research out there. You can learn how does a 16-year-old think and how do they grow and what are they thinking about? How do they what's their motive behind specific decisions? And then you just think, okay, we have this child psychology on one hand and then
Yep.
good theology on the other hand and bring them
Exactly.
together and there you go. There's some more
It works.
confidence
It
in student
works.
ministry.
Yes. Yes. And secondly, we came here because we had known, okay, we want to be part of a gospel centered, accountable church.
Mhm.
So, funny enough, I was on a date with my wife and we went to act29.com/jobs and I clicked on the first job and I moved here. So,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, so that's how I found this. And they had a part-time kids ministry role. And I came in and said, hey, if I came here, if I moved to Baltimore with my wife and with my child, this needs to be full time.
Mhm.
So I support raised some. We came up here, toured it, fell in love with this city, saw the huge spiritual need here. It's a hugely
Yeah.
unchurched place. It's very rare to find a full time kids pastor here. And trust in the church here is just really, really low.
Mhm.
So we saw that need. And then thirdly, we had seen this was a young church, even though my role was birth all the way up through youth. And practicality, we had just early childhood kids here.
Yeah.
Our biggest kid was second grade when I first came here.
Wow.
And now we're just starting to get youth. Part of that is because
Yeah.
the Baltimore City schools are not known for good things.
Right.
Oftentimes here, when you have kids, you leave.
Yeah.
So part of why when they planted this church and said, we want to invest in kids ministry, part of that was let's change that. Let's
Mhm.
give moms and dads a reason to stay here with quality kids
Wow.
ministry.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What a crazy story. I do want to ask you, this will be later because we got to get to the content of the podcast, but I would love to hear your perspective on moving from Bernie, Texas to Baltimore, Maryland, which are like totally different cultures. But
That
if we
might
have
be a
time at
whole
the
nother
end, we'll get to
podcast.
that. It might be. It might be. Okay. But we already kind of established that early childhood is important, right? The first 4 years, that birth to preschool, kindergarten are just really important. And we kind of already mentioned that they often get overlooked, right? You had said that sometimes it's just primarily childcare, that they're not really doing anything on Sundays. They're just playing. Volunteers feel nervous of like, how do I run? I can't teach them. Like, what is all these things, all these big barriers from actually doing something with these kids on Sunday morning? How have you, as you've stepped into the preschool role, as you've now stepped into families, what does it look like for you to champion early childhood, maybe in your conversations with senior leadership or volunteers? What has that looked like, and what kind of language are you using to really cast vision for the importance of early childhood?
Yeah, so let's start from the theological lens. Jesus makes it really, really clear how he feels about young kids.
Mhm.
And I mean, even when you look in the Greek, when he says, you must become like one of these kids, one of these children, that word there is like infant. So that's a young
Mhm.
child. So Christ makes it really, really clear that he cares about young kids. So that's why the ministry that I just started is called Jesus Loves Preschoolers, because
Yeah.
that's why. So as I walk around this church and as I'm sitting in staff meetings and as I'm trying to, in a sense, push along, advocate for kids, I'm saying for that. I use that phrase constantly.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was trying to point back to Christ's heart for kids as a really, really big deal.
Mhm.
Yeah, as everybody hearing this knows, your pastor is going to be intrigued by that.
Mhm.
And when you point to first your why is, hey, because Jesus loves kids, I don't know one lead pastor that's going to fight you on that front.
Right.
So if you start there, they're in lockstep there. Um, I am my role here. I just proposed a pretty large increased child safety policy.
Mhm.
And when I start with, hey, because Jesus loves kids, this is
Yeah.
worth it.
Yeah.
That is a really, really easy yes.
Mhm.
Because Jesus loves kids. We're called to care for kids. We're called to help kids see church as safe. So
Yeah.
then from the standpoint of that too, I'm going to use that to kind of leapfrog to my second point. I am constantly talk about church being a safe place for kids. The
Mhm.
first 4 and 5 years of life, kids' brains are trying to learn, what is this world like and what do I
Mhm.
need to live in this world? And
Mhm.
if we show kids during the first 1 to 5 years of life, church is a safe place. Church is a place where you're loved, where you're seen, where you're valued. We're showing them there's a God who sees, loves, and values them.
Yeah.
And you can point back to, or you should be able to point back to everything that you do in your rooms as you train volunteers,
Mhm.
as you serve moms and dads and families. Um, it all should point back to that, right?
Yeah.
That,
For
hey,
sure.
we're trying to speak truth about who Christ is and what we do with these kids,
Yeah.
with these families.
Yeah. I love that. I think a good, interesting question that I've heard a lot is how can a church not just champion kids, right? Because they could have an incredible Sunday morning program
Absolutely.
or Saturday or whatever, but the parents with young kids. Because I think sometimes you like plan a partner meeting and it's at 6:30 p.m. or you do some member thing or some barbecue or some really church-wide event that you want everyone to be a part of, but you make it at such a difficult time for parents with young kids. And so, how have you thought about this strategically in your church? Have you been able to champion not just for the kids program,
Yeah.
but for parents as a whole? And I know that you and I are in a similar season where it's like we are parents with young kids. And so we
Yeah.
feel this tension of like, this is the worst time to host a meeting because it's right in the middle of everyone's nap time. And so
Yes.
it's just a struggle to balance. Do we try and make it? Do we mess up the whole day? Like, it's all of those things. So do you find yourself championing not just for the kids, but for the
Mhm.
families as a whole in this conversation?
I sure do. And there's a few things to think through there. Number one, the context. Baltimore and Colorado are going to be very different.
Yeah.
Now, when I first came here and tried to do what worked and bless the families in Bernie, it fell flat here.
Yeah.
My first family event here, 0 kids came. I
No.
brought in an out-of-state mission team. We housed them, we fed them, we trained them, got them all ministry
No.
safe approved, and 0 kids came.
That's
Because
so
I didn't
sad.
have the context yet to see what does what does what do moms and dads, what do the families in Baltimore need?
Yeah.
So I just assumed they need a free date night. They don't.
Right.
They don't want that. And they don't want that from the church who they don't trust yet.
Yeah.
So I learned, okay, wait, here I need to go out and build trust first before we
Hmm.
invite in.
Right. I mean, that's a very different, going back to kind of our comment of like different cultures, right? In the South, people trust the church way more
Yeah.
than they do in the city of Denver, but also in the Northeast. And
Yes.
so it's just, that's such a good learning point of one, it's the context of like, know your community, know
Yeah.
your parents. So that's really helpful.
It's huge. I mean, even in the way that I speak about it, when I meet a dad at the park, I don't say I'm a kid's pastor
Mm-hmm.
because here that sounds suspicious. You
Mm.
work with kids in church. That doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
I go, no, I lead families at my church. And they're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
cool, great.
Right.
Secondly, yeah, just know your church and do life with the moms and dads, do life with the families in your church, and you'll see needs that need met.
Yeah.
And then you can meet those needs, or you can say, hey, they might need this class, but they don't need programming. So
Mm.
maybe we'll do a Zoom class. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll just do it once every 6 weeks because what they don't need is one more every week thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a small Texas town, Friday nights, you don't want to do stuff
Oh no.
because Friday Night Lights, that's a real
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Here, Friday nights are pretty freed up.
Mm-hmm.
So think through
Yeah.
that. Um, how that looks here, I found a few things. Parents here, they're not on social media much. We have a lot of young professionals here that
Interesting.
who really do read emails. And I'm not used to that. I'm used to the emails get sent out and ignored and Facebook post gets seen.
Mm.
But here that's flipped. So what we've done is every Thursday we have a City Kids newsletter that gets sent out. 3 out of 4 weeks is just going to be here's some tools, here's some stuff to bless you and equip you. Once every month it's going to be announcement like. But we found for us 7 o'clock PM works best to press send because
Right.
that's when moms and dads are doing bath time and they're sitting on the closed potty right next to it and scrolling through their phones trying to kill time. And they see that
Yes.
pop up saying, hey,
Yep.
get off your phone and do this. And they're like,
Yeah.
great, cool. And that serves them well.
Yeah. That's amazing for you to be able to spot those key differences. And I think this is such a good reminder for kids ministry leaders because the world, even the kids ministry world right now is like social media, social media, social media. And there's all this pressure to establish a really great social media presence. But yeah, I mean, yes, it is important, but also you have to know your parents. You have to know if they're like, why spend so many hours of your time that is so precious during the week creating this big social media strategy if they're not going to use it. And I think for
Right.
you to be able to spot, well, we learned that 7 p.m. is the perfect time, not 8 a.m. when they're getting started with their workday and they're going to forget their email. But it's some of those really practical kind of processes and just the way that you're thinking as a family ministry pastor for your parents,
Right.
not the parents across the United States.
Right. Right.
And I think that's so important.
One more thought as you think through how do I champion the families in my church? Really, really cautiously think through when you're going to add a weekly thing.
Hmm.
I came here and thought, okay, every church in the South has midweek. We should have
Yeah.
midweek. Parents here don't want that. And when you say with your mouth, the family is a big deal, moms and dads are called to steward the spiritual life of their own kids, which you
Hmm.
you you and I would say yes, that.
Hmm.
But then when we have them in church every night of the week, that's not functionally what we're saying.
Yeah.
So think through, do I have space for the families to be in their homes, in their friends' homes, in their schools?
Hmm.
Is there
Yeah.
space for that? Or have I built all of these shiny things that they're now in church every night?
Hmm. Yeah. Those are such good things. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit because I kind of want to talk about what some of your strategies are around helping volunteers teach big biblical truths, so good theology to preschoolers, because again, we've established that early childhood matters. We know that the first handful of years are so important. You and I would both say that our preschoolers are able to understand and retain more information than we give them credit for. And for volunteers, that can feel really intimidating
Mhm.
because in the preschool years, you get some very off the wall big questions. And I always think back to when my daughter was in preschool. I was picking her up one Sunday after church, and the volunteer had like big deer in the headlight eyes, and she was like, "Ruby asked a really hard question today." And I was like, "Oh no." I'm like, "What did she ask you?" And she was asking questions about the Trinity.
Yeah.
And this volunteer was just she was so caught off guard, didn't know what to say. And so there's so much to help early childhood volunteers feel
Yeah.
confident teaching big theological truths in a way that, again, these preschoolers can understand and can start to kind of store these truths away in their hearts. So I would love for you to walk through, like, what are some of your favorite teaching strategies? What are some of
Yeah.
your favorite things to even teach the early childhood years, the kids in those years? Do you have like here's our core things that we teach consistently? I don't know. Just let us know. What are your thoughts around teaching theology to the small kids?
Yeah. So first, let me touch on the how do you teach volunteers to do that?
Yes.
So for us, it's trickle it down. So think about most of the volunteers in your spaces probably watch TikTok, probably
Mhm.
do the short form stuff more than long form stuff.
Yeah.
So for us, I send out every Thursday a 2 or 3 minute training video that, hey, here's some
Mhm.
tools for you. As I'm a big early childhood nerd and I'm reading books on the human brain, my volunteers aren't, and that's
Right.
fine.
Exactly.
My job is to equip them. So as I
Mhm.
find tools from those books, as I find tools from the Kids Ministry Circle podcast, I then pass those to them, right?
Mhm.
In a short form like that, 2 or 3
Yeah.
minutes. I just call that take three. And I send that out once every week.
Mm.
So short form's huge. And then we ask our volunteers to prep for every weekend with 555. So spend 5 minutes reading this week's lesson plan. Spend 5 minutes reading this week's Bible story. Don't just read the plan, read
Right.
the scripture, and then spend 5 minutes praying through your kids,
Mm.
praying for your kids. I have a goal that every child in City Kids every week is prayed for by name,
Yeah.
which means our volunteers need to set aside time for it. And that
Yeah.
555 is accessible. hey, you can spend 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here, and then you're ready.
Mhm.
Which means that the tools that we give them need to be really, really well done.
Yeah.
So we've thought through for a long time curriculum that we use, we would copy and paste and send them tons and tons of tools. And it was
Mm.
just too much.
Yeah.
So now we sort through it more. And then we sort this into three color coded categories: play it, teach it, sing it.
Okay.
And then on the visual schedule, it's the same thing so that they can look and say, oh, it's play it time. Go to the orange. Here's the play it game. And they can leave that.
Yeah.
And then, okay, it's green. It's teach it time. Here's this week's story. Let's teach this.
Mhm.
Blue. Now it's the sing it time. We're going to go do that. And here's the song. And it's in the app with the name. And it's
Mhm.
just there. We're ready. So all of that just to say, give your team really, really good tools
Yeah.
that they can just use. As you learn, pass along what you learn, and then work really, really hard to give them a lesson plan that they can read with a full-time job
Mhm.
and that they can read and come in ready to run, ready
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to think through what have I learned that I can now pass to them.
Yeah. I love the idea of the short form because that's what people are used to right now. And so
Uh-huh.
instead of being, and this is obviously an option, like people can do whatever they want, but
Yeah.
instead of being like, hey, let's read this whole book, for you as a volunteer leader, as a kids ministry staff, to say, hey, over the course of the next 6 weeks, I'm going to sprinkle what I learned in the book into these bite-sized information pieces. Because I think a lot of times, sometimes when you say, hey, volunteers, let's read this whole book,
Yeah.
they get a chapter in and they stop reading. And you're like, wait, there's so much more to be read and to
Chapter
learn.
4 is so good. Come
I
on.
know. And so it is, I think that's so crucial. Like, let me just give you some bite-sized information on, because then that shows your volunteers that you are learning. You
Yeah.
as the leader are continually learning on how to do this better. And you are
Yes.
going to give them the information that they need to know. Because you may
Yeah.
read a whole book on, let's go with your example, on like the brain, on the child's brain. And well, you may say, well, this whole book is not important for early childhood because there may be nuggets for early childhood and then there may also be nuggets for elementary. And so you can kind of, as you're reading and as you're learning, say, oh, this is what my volunteers would be helpful for them to know. And then you just give it to them in bite-sized information so that they can immediately put it into practice. Because it's true. Most of your volunteers are working full-time jobs, whether they're a stay-at-home mom or going to an office Monday through
Absolutely.
Friday. It's like they are busy. They're not consistently thinking about children's ministry in a way that the kids ministry staff person is. And so
Yes.
to hand off some of that bite-sized information is so smart. That's brilliant. I love it.
It's huge, and when I first just started, I tried that practically of going, "You know what? I just heard this Kids Matter podcast. It's great. I'm gonna
Mhm.
send out the link." They don't
Right.
want the whole thing.
No.
I should just take the one thing that I learned from that, that made me think my team needs this. I
Mhm.
should just give them that.
Yeah.
Just that one thing. I can put that in
Yeah.
my 2 or 3 minute video, or I can just type up a small thing and press send.
Yeah.
And then
That's
as
so
far
smart.
as tools for when you you teach kids, there's a few that I start with. Um, Kids, and you'll see this in shows too when you watch for it, kid shows,
Mhm.
but kids need attention shifts every minute for how many years they've been alive.
Okay, wait.
So you won't see, so let's say that a child's 3.
Uh-huh.
That means when you're up on that stage or when you're doing your circle time, you should shift things every 3 minutes. So if I'm doing 3 circle time, we'll sing the good morning song for 3 minutes, and then we'll stop and we'll stand up and we'll stretch and we'll run to church and we'll ride our horse to church and we'll do those things for 3 more minutes. And then we stop and then we do the next thing. And then when I teach large group, it's the same thing. I'm going to do the mystery box and then I'm
Mhm.
going to do yeah, here's part of what we're going to learn, and here's a tool that shows you that in the prop, and then I'm gonna
Mhm.
put on a code and act as this for another 3 minutes, and you'll catch that same thing in shows too. My little girl is obsessed with Doc McStuffins, and every 2 or 3 minutes, things change. These scene shifts because they
That's
know how
fascinating.
kids' brains work.
I'm gonna have to watch for that. I'm like replaying shows in my head. We also went through a Doc McStuffins phase, and it's very fun.
It sure is.
That's so fascinating. The okay, so now I'm thinking I'm jumping to elementary because that's where I teach large group. But I'm like, okay, there's 5-year-olds sitting in a class with 9-year-olds.
Yeah, so do the center age boys. So if
Okay.
you have 5 to 10s, if you can reach a 7.5-year-old boy,
Uh-huh.
everybody else will think it's cool.
So it's like 7, so
So
7 minutes is kind of your sweet spot where it's like you don't teach for 20 minutes.
yeah,
Maybe it's you teach a little bit, do a song, and then finish
yep,
the story.
yes.
That
Every
just
time that you shift what you do, you kind of reset that clock.
oh my goodness. My brain. I'm like, that just changes like everything. Cause I like a lot of churches will do, oh, I'm gonna live teach the story and I'm gonna stand up here for
Yeah.
15 minutes.
Yeah,
And then you get to the end and you're like, I don't even know if anybody's still listening.
right. Because they don't think like that. And you think in chunks. So when I taught, my first church was a huge church.
Mm-hmm.
I taught a lot of kids and it was a mixed age group. And that same thing, I would stand up there. My full-time job was the large group lead. I would stand up there with a kid with first through fifth grade kids for 22 minutes and teach.
Yeah.
And the kids would be honed in. And people would be like, how? Because of that. I thought, okay, 22, let's split that up. Let's divide that by 5. And now I'm going to plan a bunch of 5 minutes back to back and
That
think of it
is
like that.
brilliant. Oh my goodness. I think people are just their brains are gonna go crazy because that's so smart.
Use that. That one's great. One more thing, and I love this. This always blows minds when I share this. I learned this in a music and movement class. Early childhood college is so much fun. Music class. Um, Oftentimes, when young kids are in praise time, they just stand there on their rug staring at you.
Mm-hmm.
Those kids, most of the time, think that they're singing. Their brains haven't caught up with doing it yet. And then when you step in and say, hey, Lauren, sing, you just disrupted that and woke them up from that. And now they'll take more time to get there because the brain has to watch and learn first, picture it, and then do it.
Oh my. Okay, wait. So are you saying to not like say I'm leading preschool worship on
Yep.
Sunday, for example?
Yep.
Because our first thing is like, oh, get them engaged. You call them out and you say, like, hey, so and so, like, let's sing with me.
Right.
And that's very inviting. But should we not do that? Or should we do like a
No,
big
you
at the beginning, say, hey, everyone sing this song together and then start the song and let them figure it out?
right. So invite them as a large group when you first start. I do say, okay, everybody needs to stand. And
Hmm.
that's the baseline. If you sit
Yeah.
down, I will ask you to stand.
Yeah.
Baseline is stand. At the front end, I'm going to say, okay, everybody follow me. We're going to sing and dance. We're going to praise. And then as some kids sing, some kids dance, some kids just stand there. I might call out the kids who do sing and do
Hmm.
dance and say, hey, great job.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to call out the kids that are not because most of the time, if they're 2, 3, and 4, their brains are trying to think through it and they're just not there yet. And if you
That's so
stop those kids after class and say, hey, did you sing? Oh, yeah, I did great. Because they think that they did. They saw it in their minds.
that is hilarious. Now, did that time shorten as so say you sing the same song every Sunday and they're there every Sunday. Does
Yeah.
that process time shorten as they get to know a certain song?
It sure does. Yep.
Everybody needs to take an early childhood class.
My mind was blown. And then since I taught at that large church, I then got to go try these things out right away. And I was like,
Yeah,
oh my gosh, this works. What in the world?
that's crazy. Okay, so how does this come into play when Easter's right around the corner?
Yeah.
How do these tricks come into play when you are preparing for an Easter lesson where you are having a bigger theological conversation around Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection? How would you encourage preschool leaders to teach some of those big conceptual? And we don't have, I mean, you could probably talk for like a half hour on this. We don't have a half hour, but
Yeah.
like little nuggets, like what are some things that you are thinking through even now as you are helping your team prep for Easter? What are some things that you would tell a preschool volunteer or someone who's oversees preschool ministry?
Yeah. So kids, like you said, can grasp a whole lot more than we think.
Mhm.
Yeah. We just went to a museum of art here last week, and there was this giant medieval Christ on a cross statue. And my 4-year-old girl just stopped in front of that and just stared up at it and turns to me and goes, "That's beautiful. Look at that." And she knew what that was. We talked about
Mhm.
that Jesus dying on the cross, and
Mhm.
she could say why. And there's some things that she can't quite grasp yet, like the finality of death. Her brain's
Mhm.
not there yet.
Yeah.
My grandfather just died, and she's struggling with, what does this mean? Are we gonna see him again?
Yeah.
Jesus came back. Is he going to come back? She plays games where her toys die and then they come back because Jesus did. So that means everybody else
Mm.
can, right? So there's a lot that we can tear apart and talk through there. And the Zello
Mhm.
home, we talked about death a whole lot this past month.
Yeah.
Um, and it's been hard and it's been beautiful seeing that she can grasp things.
Mhm.
So I will say two things: show it and play it. Kids learn through those things. Kids don't just learn by hearing it. Kids learn when things are shown and played.
Mhm.
So starting with that playing piece, Enneagram 7 here, I like to keep things upbeat. So when she was playing Elsa, Anna, Elsa then died. And I'm like, no, 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 let's not play death. What if they go to the ice cream stand instead? No, I had to step back and know, okay, wait, her brain's trying to figure out what death is. How can
Right.
we play it? So
Yeah.
as I think through Easter, I'm gonna think through, okay, what can I give kids to play to start to think this through? Can
Mhm.
we have a cave with a sheet that they can
Mhm.
fold up? Can we have that? Can we have the gifts that might have been brought to the tomb that we can have for them to explore with their hands? So clearly we're not going to get graphic here, but
Right.
what is it that kids can touch and play with?
Yeah.
Oftentimes you and I think, okay, play means fun, but kids don't think like that. Kids think play means learning. So there can be
Interesting.
sad play too. Think of even play therapy.
Right.
If a child comes from an abusive home, a therapist will then play with them, not to
Mhm.
have fun, but to see how is their brain dealing with this
Yeah.
and how can they grow.
Right.
So think through, what in the story can we play purposefully?
Mhm.
And then show it. What can you show? Can you pass around a piece of wood when you talk about the cross that they can
Yeah.
touch and hold and see? Can you, for a very, very brief second, can you turn off the lights in your room to show, hey, there was darkness
Right.
that swept over the whole land, and here's why. Can you
Mhm.
have a piece of cloth that you tear? I've heard it said when you're on stage and you teach preschoolers or when you lead that story time, never have your hands free. Always
Mm.
hold something visual that you can show those kids. And even when you think through, well, this week's story is about a robe. They know what a robe's like. No, get a robe.
Yeah.
Even if you just bring your bathrobe from home and put it on a kid, it's really cute. Put it on them. It's
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
Um, show them. What can you show them and what can you play with them? And those will be things that'll stick. That's what kids
Mhm.
will go home and talk about. Not what
Yeah.
you said from stage, but what you showed them and what you played with them.
Mhm. That's awesome. Those are such great ideas. Okay, Josh, the last question we always ask is if you were talking to someone brand new to kids ministry, so they just stepped into their new role in kids ministry, what would be your words of encouragement or advice?
I would say if you can, if you have the time for it or make time for it, become a kid nerd. Learn what kids like,
Mhm.
learn what kids watch. Find a kid and a mom and dad that you can go see that new Paw Patrol film with. Find out what kids like and engage them there. I'm kind of known in the church world for my fun shirts, my Mickey Mouse shirts or Bluey shirts. And it's not that I'm going to teach them about Mickey Mouse in church.
Mhm.
I'm showing them, hey, the things that you care about, I care about too, and I can build that bridge.
Yeah.
So oftentimes when I am speak with a new kids ministry volunteer who does not work with kids, who does not have kids, I'm like, hey, I'm going to challenge you. Go on Disney Plus and the kids section, spend a full 30 minutes, just watch some stuff.
Mhm.
Find out what kids like. When you
Yeah.
see a kid with a book bag, how cool is that if you can then call that out and say, I know Doc McStuffins. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Use those things to use those things to contextualize with your kids. Much
Mhm.
like if you were going to go to Ethiopia, you would study what do they like? What do they sing? How do they speak? What do they eat? Study
Yeah.
that with kids. Carl Bastion says, become a kidologist. Much like that, learn what kids like and run with that. And then in that
Mhm.
same vein, find out what's a big deal to your own kids and show up for those things. So
Mhm.
for us, we have a young girl who just started to come to our church. She's about 6, and she is in a recital class for dance. And I showed up. I came on a Saturday night and sat with her mom and brought flowers. And this girl was so touched because what was a big deal for her was a big
Mhm.
deal for me.
Yeah.
And we now have through our site a way that if you have a kids event, you can let us know. And then I let the whole volunteer team know. Hey, Lauren has dance Saturday at 6. Let me know if you want me to save you seats.
That's so cute.
Show up.
Yeah.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. The show up piece, the get to know the kids. It's just so good. It just helps build those relationships. It helps get to know how their brains think, what they're into. I mean, I can't tell you over the years I've had so many conversations about Harry Potter that I'm like I have not read the books. I've watched the movies. But it's
Yeah,
like they like that. They like those things. They like I mean, here in Colorado, it's like if you don't know that the Broncos played yesterday, then you are out of the loop. And so
exactly.
those things matter to the kids in your ministry. And so that's such a good reminder. Well, Josh, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and what you've got coming up with Jesus Loves Preschoolers?
Yeah, so find me at jesuslovespreschoolers.com. Tried to make that memorable there.
Mm-hmm.
So what you can expect there, there's going to be blogs, there's going to be coaching, there's going to be cohorts. I'm trying to think through what can I do to spend time and equip those who serve birth to 4s and 5s.
Yeah.
How can I serve them and love on them? There is a private Facebook group too, and that's called Jesus Loves Preschoolers. So you can find that there. And God willing, there's a podcast soon too. I just bought a mic.
Look at your fancy mic. I love that. Awesome. Well, we'll link everything in the show notes so people can follow and join the Facebook group and send their email so that they can be a part of all the fun things that you've got at Jesus Loves Preschoolers. Thanks so much, Josh.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lauren.